agriculture, including the ones extended by an expanding world population and the ongoing environmental degradation. And the climate change just acts onto it. And this is not only a stress to plants, but it indirectly turns to be a stress for human welfare as well, because food and food prices both have a direct effect on human health. So agriculture is very important, and understanding crops in climate change therefore becomes a hot field in the present times. So what do we mean by the impact of climate change on plants? We understand that climate change would result in high temperatures, which can result in drought, salinity, so on and so forth. And these are all traditional stresses for the plants. But other than that, we must understand that for each crop plant, there is an ambient growing requirement. Which becomes the surrounding climate for the particular plant. And whenever there is anything which is in excess, which is less, if the climatic conditions come too soon or too less, any of these can also be a stress on the plant, and this will directly impact the yield and result in diminished quality of the product. Lot of estimates and lot of discussions have happened on this topic. And towards this, these two things are important, two predictions rather. One predicts that there is a 7% reduction for every 1 degree rise in average day temperature. And according to another prediction, there would be a 10% yield decline for an increase in night temperature by 1 degree. So this 3% difference by a similar 1 degree temperature increase either during the day or the night time, but the difference is too much. 3% when it comes to crops becomes too much, and this is what we need to understand as scientists, that what is the difference in the impact getting so enhanced in absence of a light. So we will dwell upon this also during the later part of my talk. Now coming on to the major crop that we are focusing on, and that becomes rice. Why? Because if you look at the summary which was released by the International Rice Congress, this happens once in every 4 years, and according to them, the demand of rice would increase by 25%. At the same time, because of climate change and the limited availability of arable land and fresh water, the price increase would be 30%. So to control this, as well as to meet the price, the required grain content, we need to have a tremendous increase in rice production. This is not only by increasing the production capacity of the plants, but also we need to look at and mitigate the processes which result in yield losses, both in the pre-harvest as well as in the post-harvest stage. And as scientists, we are more concerned in the pre-harvest stage, where the plants are growing in the field, and see that if anything can be done to reduce the yield losses. So there is one is that we have to increase the yield, and other is if we can reduce the yield losses, this would bridge the gap and would help in meeting the grain supply. Now this becomes these two factors becomes very important when we consider rice, because rice perceives stresses or becomes sensitive to stresses at two stages. One is during the early seedling stage, and second as at the reproductive stage. So during the entire life cycle of rice, there will be two sensitive points which are coming, and this needs to be really understood. But before we get into the molecular biology, we also need to understand is, looking at a country which is with a diverse climate and conditions, such as in India, we can find rices which are growing in the land, that is the upland rices, to the rice which are growing in deep water, say in the northeastern regions of the country, and also in varied climatic conditions, from high temperature regions down south to the low high altitude, low temperature regions in the northern part of the country. Yet rice is growing well, the plant is growing well and has adapted to grow in their particular niches. So that means that the genetic information is there in the genes, but it is the expression profiles which has helped the plants to adapt to their local niches. And if anything gets disturbed in this local niche, it would have an impact on the plant. And this is what we need to understand, that considering that the genetic information is the same, what is there or what changes occur at the transcriptomic and the proteomic levels, which influence the local adaptability of the rice plant. Now, we all know that this is classical research, and a lot of studies on gene expression have been done for the last so many years. It won't be wrong to say the century. But the real efforts on understanding the genomics and starting the genome sequencing started somewhere in the year 2000 and have progressed then from there on. And now we have about 6,000 rice genomes which have been sequenced, and these sequences are available. These different rice genomes from different localities, a lot of syntenic maps have been created, and all the classical genomic organization studies is going on. But it is important also to understand that this timeline overlaps with the evolution and the discovery of RNAi, which happened in 1990, have progressed, and 2002 was declared as the year of science and technology. In fact, 2002 was the year where actually microRNAs started getting discovered in plants. So there are almost overlapping in terms of discovery, that the genome sequence, as the genome sequencing started, the understanding on the plant microRNAs have also started, and the two are going hand in hand. And we have now reached a stage where we to completely agree and understand as a scientific community that silencing of gene is equally important as the expression of genes. In fact, it is the dynamic interaction between the two processes which would govern the transcriptomic and the proteomic profile which is available in the plant. And silencing, I'm sure, is not new to the audience at ICER, but still for the people who are less aware, the RNA constitutes a large family, and in this family there is a major portion occupied by non-coding RNAs. There are different kinds of non-coding RNAs, and of these there is a category of RNA which is about 20 to 24, 25 nucleotides in length, and these constitute the small RNA, and they have regulatory functions. And within this category also we have classified the RNAs into different groups based on our ease of understanding of their biogenesis and function. And a major category in this happens to be the microRNAs or the miRNAs. So what is so special about this category is that other than being small and non-coding, they are endogenous. That means they are transcribed from the genome, just like any other RNA polymerase to gene or transcript gets transcribed. It is just that this transcript will not code for a protein, but will get structurally folded to and will be acted upon by a series of proteins, which will produce a duplex small RNA, and this duplex small RNA in the cytoplasm associates with a complex called the RNA silencing induced complex, and goes and brings about silencing of the genes. Now, microRNAs, as we are understanding their size distribution and their class distribution, we know that they can modulate the regulation at the post-transcriptional level by either transcript cleavage or translation repression, but they also have the capability of acting at the transcriptional silencing level by bringing about epigenetic or transcriptional silencing. The key point here is not what microRNAs are, because that has now become a textbook knowledge. But the point here is that how powerful a single microRNA molecule can be. And just to support my statement, I show here these three pictures. These are classical pictures. This is what a normal Arabidopsis plant looks like. This is a Arabidopsis plant overexpressing a particular miRNA, which has changed it into a heavily vegetative structure, increasing the vegetative biomass. And this is a phenotype which occurs by overexpression of another microRNA, which turns this rosette into a heavily branching rosette. An ideal plant for the foliage or the foliage kind of crops like spinach and all. And again, an ideal phenotype for crops where we are dependent upon the seeds, including the cereals. But is it that simple? No, because as we get into crop plants, we get into understanding the complexities, and unless and until we fully understand a complexity, it will not be able to tweak the regulatory molecules for optimum requirement. So before we get into that, let us see what all the microRNAs are doing. They are regulating almost every aspect of plant physiology. So although we see a phenotype here, there may be other influences on the plant that are occurring at the biochemical and the physiological levels, which need to be understood, investigated and understood in detail. So like I said, microRNAs are regulating every aspect of plant biology, and this includes the responses to stress. And this is another cartoon which I picked up from the Arabidopsis literature. Arabidopsis happens to be the model plant, where it has shown that how it has been shown that how multiple stresses like ABA, cold, salt, so on and so forth, would regulate key microRNAs, either upregulating or downregulating them, so that there is an inverse regulation on their downstream targets. And in this case, the targets happen to be either key transcription factors or enzymes that regulate a phase or a phenotype of the plant. But it is not as simple as the single line diagram that has been shown here, because at the cellular level, there would be a lot of crosstalk, overlap, and complex signaling networks that are getting activated or modulated in response to the different stresses. There would be converging and diverging nodes, and these nodes have to be carefully understood before we can use or try to manipulate one of them to let the plant grow and produce seeds happily under a changing environment. And just to add on to the complexity, I will show you here another picture of some of the same microRNAs which have been listed here, and how they are regulating the phytohormones or the signal, either at their signaling level or the receptor levels or the downstream transcription factors, to form complex hormone microRNA target nodes. And therefore, if we tweak one, we are bound to influence or to affect the overall phenotype of the plant. So what emerges therefore is that the transcription factors are regulating the microRNA biogenesis, and the microRNA in turn is regulating the activity of the transcription factors. And both of them turn out to be can be categorized as master regulators, because they are both naturally occurring processes. They can impact one or more genes or pathways, and they also regulate a number of downstream endogenous genes or biochemical pathways. So here we have two master regulators that are acting in sync in a circular or a network kind of a manner to regulate the physiology of the plant. We know we have a sufficient enough knowledge about this group of proteins, and this is new information about which is still emerging. We have some knowledge, and we are adding new knowledge by the days as discovery process. Okay, so with this background, the take home that can be summarized in a line or in a sentence is that alteration of abundance of microRNAs can lead to developmental abnormalities or disease state in plants. As long as these alterations are negative alterations, but they can be worked for our benefit to allow the plant to become more robust and more high yielding. So with this in mind, we asked three questions: that are there any potential master regulators that can modulate the plant physiology to adapt to stress in terms of microRNAs? Plant viruses, we know, bring suppressors of RNA silencing with them. This is another field, and I hope that you people are aware of it. But these suppressors of silencing can be used as probes to understand the microRNAs and their role in the abiotic stresses of the plants. And can these microRNA tools be useful to enhance the productivity of the plants? So on these three broad, to answer these three broad questions, we adopted an approach in the lab. And rather than showing you hardcore data, what I'm going to do is walk you through what we have done over the last few years to make you understand how the mysteries were unraveled in front of us, and which we couldn't put all the leads, but which leads we have picked up and are moving forward with them. Okay, so this is what we started to do. We took the rice plant, looked at the different tissues, the three major tissues being panicle, leaf, and root, but across different developmental stages. By mainly, we started the work by NGS sequences. And to start with rice, we didn't know which varieties to take. So we selected the varieties based on literature, based on their role in susceptibility or tolerance towards particular stresses. And when we took this wide collection of rice varieties, we found that these had varieties which could be classified based on grain size into short grain, medium grain, and long grain. So essentially, we had a lot of diversity between the rice varieties that we took. And within this pool, we also included a few transgenics, which was supposed to be the abiotic stress tolerant transgenics in these backgrounds to help us to serve as controls and help us understand the process and overcome the diversity in the various rice genotypes. And like I said, we took the help of NGS as a starting point and started by sequencing not only the small RNA libraries, but also the transcriptome libraries and a few degradome libraries. Now, degradome is essentially a pool of the transcriptomes which include all the molecules that have been cleaved by the microRNAs, and this is done by mapping the cleaved end. So this can help us appreciate that among the transcriptome, which are the targeted transcripts that are cleaved, and the others may also include transcripts that are translationally repressed. So having generated these different libraries, we did a lot of bioinformatic analysis to sift the data, mine the data, and to make useful deductions out of them. And of course, these studies were done not only under the normal physiological conditions, but also under the stressed conditions by using salt, drought, high temperature stresses. And we included here virus infections as one of the abiotic stresses, because high temperatures, when they happen, in high temperatures, a lot of insect population gets attracted to the plant, and these invariably turn out to be carriers of one or the other viruses. So we decided to keep virus as a control, and we started looking at individual stresses in different combinations of them to understand what is happening or what the plant is facing in the field conditions. Anyway, this was an overview. So a lot of data emerged. These were complex graphs, not showing a lot of variations, but no clear-cut pattern emerging. And these could be plotted in tissue-specific, stress-specific, or variety-specific manner. Of course, we also identified a large number of novel molecules. Many of these have also been deposited in the Mirbase registry. started doing a lot of validations initially by using northerns, because that is the best way to determine whether a particular microRNA is actually present or not. Then graduated to looking at their targets and started building complex target microRNA nodes till we could zero on to specific members of a family which were coming up in a particular tissue, and then and we could get a fair enough idea about microRNAs, which specific family members which were showing leaf specific, root specific or flower specific expression under normal conditions. Having said that, since we had a lot of NGS data, the quick way was to do a lot of global microRNA arrays, where specific arrays were custom synthesized, and again a lot of heat maps were generated. So what we did was, rather than getting into details, we just pulled out what was common, was showing commonality between the NGS and the microarray data to have a subset of population, and used this subset of population now for getting into individual studies. Now, for today's talk, I have picked up salt stress as an example, because for salinity stress, we had taken Pusa basmati as the classical susceptible variety. Since a tolerant variety was available in terms of Pokali, which is endemic to the southern part of India. But then there are differences between the two backgrounds, because this happens to be a long grain fragrant rice, and this happens to be a thick short grain non-fragrant rice. Now, to get an actual control, so we were fortunate enough to get the glyoxylase overexpressing plants. Now, these glyoxylase expressing plants have been generated in Professor Sapori's group, and they have been shown to be tolerant to number of abiotic stresses, including salt stress. And since this was in the Pusa basmati background, they served as ideal control in the pathway. And in this, we have generated another set of transgenic, which happens to be the B2 protein overexpressing transgenics. And these transgenics also happen to be salt tolerant. The FHV stands for flock house virus. This is an insect virus, and B2 is a suppressor coded by this insect virus. This B2 also acts as a suppressor in plants, and when we overexpress rice plants, when we produce rice plants overexpressing B2, they show a salt tolerant phenotype. So this was another control in the pathway where we had B2 in the Pusa basmati background. So here, these are plants overexpressing a biochemical pathway, and these are plants with a viral suppressor, and these two served as controls for understanding the salt phenomena. So what we got was this. When we compared the glyoxylase overexpressing plants with the Pusa basmati plants growing under the normal conditions, this is how the microRNA profiles look. So almost a scattered plot of the red and the black dots. Reds are for the glyoxylase, and the black ones are for the second control, where the salt stress glyoxylase were compared with the Pusa basmati salt stress. So if you see that the two dots are, two graphs are very scattered, and the plots are no clear cut pattern is emerging. So we try to look at the data in another manner, where we now compared the stressed glyoxylase with the stress under the normal glyoxylase background, and the stressed Pusa basmati with the normal Pusa basmati background. Now here Pusa basmati is the red one, and the gray dots represents glyoxylase. And now we can see a clearer pattern emerging, and what we see that the gray dots are more or less concentrated within these two bars, which show twofold plus or minus, whereas a lot of variation is seen in terms of the red dots. They come up to the six-fold variations. So what does this indicate? That the variations in the glyoxylase plant under salt stress are much more contained or subtle as compared to the variations occurring in Pusa basmati under normal and salt stress conditions. Now these variations are of course in the microRNAs. So we tried to plot them for ease. This is what the variations in Pusa basmati look at. very diverse. The different colors will show the different fold regulations. We are not getting into details, but this perceive the diversity of regulations seen here. And this is again this is now the tolerant or the Pokali phenotype. Again, we have a diversity of variation here, but we have larger a number of upregulations as compared to downregulations, whereas in Pusa Basmati there are more downregulations as compared to upregulation. Now, where does the glyoxylase plant fit? It comes here, closer to Pokali, in terms of a larger number of upregulations as compared to downregulations. But if you see here, then the fold variations are much more compared as compared to both the Pokali and the Pusa Basmati backgrounds. Now, this is probably due to overexpression of only one biochemical pathway, which is the glyoxylase pathway. And if I put here now the B2, again, this will come again in between. Now, this is just a suppressor of silencing, which makes the plant tolerant. But see, it pushes the microRNAs towards a more controlled variation. And hence, but here the number of upregulations and downregulations, not much variation is here, because here we are not tweaking any biochemical pathway, but we are providing a suppressor here. So so the next question, or the next obvious question we wanted to ask was, is this set of microRNAs same as this set, or there are molecules from these other categories which have come into this class, or a new category of molecules have come there? So initially we did try to do create Venn diagrams and try to find overlapping molecules. We could find one or two molecules out coming in the different circles, and this was again very complex and difficult to understand. And then we started looking at the variations in these molecules, how these molecules vary in stress. So when Pusa Basmati was compared against Pokali, this is the set of variations. There are more number of molecules which are getting upregulated or downregulated, and this is the variations which happens in case of Pokali, where a lot of molecules are getting downregulated or are not present. That is, their expression is getting affected. So this pool actually included molecules which of coming from the different pools, and a lot of these molecules also lost their expression, and hence a small line seen in the case of the downregulation. But these are only molecules, and they cannot be understood if we don't look at the targets. When we start looking at targets, again we had a huge diversity coming up from enzymes, transcription factors, signaling molecules, so on and so forth. So we tried to focus on the next on a set of master regulators, which were the transcription factors, and we found here almost 11 different families of transcription factors getting representatives, where a major portion was occupied by the growth regulating factors and the auxin regulating factors here. And these were they were included transcripts which were under control by more than one type of microRNAs, and this explained how a particular transcription factor may therefore act as a converging node for signals coming in response to different environmental cues. Now, most of these studies were we validated them at the transcript level, went into the order change. So went into looking at the expression profiles in the different tissues under salt stress conditions, did time kinetics of the stresses, and found molecules which were showing stark differences in regulation, either in Pokali or in Pusa Basmati. So you can see here specific molecules which are showing very high expression as compared to Pusa Basmati, where there were major down regulations happening. And we picked up these molecules, did a lot of molecular validations, and I came up with identifying the microRNA target nodes that are get differentially regulated across the different tissues under stress. So this is what a classical microRNA target profile looks at like in case of a Pokali plant, and this is how the profiles would be different if you once you start changing the genetic background to say Pusa basmati, which is not really a major change in terms of the gene profile, but only a few molecules keep changing. And like I said, then each member of the family was then investigated in details across tissues in stresses, and the windows of these microRNA target regulations were captured. And in summary here, I show here the various molecules and their key targets that are getting regulated by these microRNAs, and how they are showing an inverse relationship under salt stress physiology. So the target nodes could be this was the same microRNAs. This would is how the target nodes look at in case of the leaf tissues, and this is what is the regulation happening in case of the in the root tissues. Now we have to understand them vertically, and also in the we add a third time frame of development to understand what happens when you try to tweak one of these. So at the cellular, within the cell, what they are doing, they are acting at the genetic level. They are regulating key transcription factors, and they are also regulating the other major regulator happens to be at the ROS pathway. Some of them gets linked with the classical SOS and the NHX pathway, which has been discovered. So by now we have another layer of regulation which is happening. So you have to imagine this in a vertical time frame. Other than that, key metabolic processes are also getting affected here, and major so this is the glycolysis pathway, and this feeds into the respiratory cycle and affects the major amino acid synthesis pathways and the energy producing pathways. So on one hand, there is a major effect on the transcription factors and the ROS signaling. On the other hand, the metabolic profiles are also getting regulated by these handful of microRNAs, and a lot of this work has been published, and you can go back and refer to the papers. Well, I switch gears now and say that the study that I presented so far was only with respect to salt stress. I will not go into high temperature stress details of that, but a similar study was done using again 3 or 4 different varieties and laboriously doing the time kinetics, the different root physiologies, both for the microRNAs, the targets, and building maps and identifying the key microRNAs. But what the two, and also the studies were repeated by providing heat and salt together. Now this resulted in identification of, like I showed you, the key microRNAs and how they are getting deregulated under dual stresses of high temperature and salt stress. So we are still trying to fine tune and understand how, because when I write here HD, ZIP or NAC, they themselves are huge families, and now we are trying to understand that which particular microRNA, this particular microRNA subfamily is targeting which particular members of the NAC family under the different conditions. And in this pool, if you would have noticed, we have a few novel microRNAs also, like MIR9, which is our nomenclature that we have given, which feature in this set. Okay, so having done all these studies, we are now come up with hypothetical maps of how a particular microRNA will target a particular transcription factor. And like this is 529 targeting SPL, and the SPL will in turn regulate the ASP1, which is the sulfate transporter, and how this profile would change in with the developmental stages in the meristem from the young meristem changes to the floral meristem. So based on these, complex maps have been built, and we have we are still in the process of validating and adding more information or fine tuning these maps as far as rice is concerned. A lot of this data has been put together as a web server. This is called ARMOR, for a rice microRNA mRNA interaction resource, which is freely available on the ICGB website and can be accessed to identify the microRNAs and the targets. And the exclusive feature of this particular web server is that it contains a lot of validated data along with the predicted data. So and this can be made use for a lot of downstream analysis depending upon what information is being sought for. Now, before I progress, what I want to highlight is, which probably many of you must be knowing, that the microRNAs can be categorized into conserved and non-conserved microRNAs as far as plant species are concerned. So conserved are those which would be common between the different gymnosperms and the angiosperms, and these include the classical families like 156, 166, 65, which are involved in regulating transcription factors that in turn regulate the leaf shape or morphology, the root morphology, so on and so forth. Most of these are highly abundant and belong to large families, having up to 25 members in a family. Other than that, there are specific non-conserved molecules. Not all of them are novel, but many of them are novel as they get discovered. And these non-conserved molecules may be specific to a particular plant, say rice, or to grasses, or so on and so forth. They may be unique to a species or to a group of species. And these often do not have a very high expression pattern. Their expression patterns are weak. And many of them would act on the enzymatic or the biochemical pathway or the signaling molecules other than those of the transcription factors. And it is this set which is interesting, because these would be involved in determining why a rice plant looks like a rice and a maize plant has its own phenotype. But these are the ones which would regulate probably would be the one which would be regulating the physiology of the plant in response to its local environmental niches. So we focused on this niche and identified molecules and have progressed work further. Just one brief slide to show the applicability of ARMOR and the applicability of this data is looking for homologues in other grasses like sorghum and sugarcane. And we have used this data to identify microRNAs which are regulating the sugar content, because sorghum and sugarcane both are known for their sugar content, this being a very hardy crop and this being a climate slightly susceptible as compared to sorghum, and identified microRNAs which are regulating the sugar content and across different varieties, and how they are getting regulated in response to salt stress. Because it is seen that as stress is increased, the sugar content gets affected or it gets decreases, and this is and what we want to look at would depend upon the desirable trait or the desirable feature of the plant. So this is how the rice data is being extended to understand the data in sorghum and sugarcane, rather than going into the details. Okay, so coming back to the non-conserved microRNAs, so we picked up one such molecule and we found that this showed a difference in the family member and genomic location even between the Japonica and the Indica varieties. Now that we have a whole thousands of rice genome sequence, this is an easy not so difficult task if I don't use easy. And we found that the location and the family members on Japonica were completely different as compared to Indica. Now this indicated that this is an evolutionarily very recent microRNA, and this probably emerged or rather has been emerging after the divergence of the species. And this particular microRNA is pollen specific. I am not getting into the details of it because large part of this data is unpublished, but what I'll show you just to keep your interest alive is to show you this panel of plants. And within this, if you see that there are specific plants which are much more vigorous or dense as compared to the others, these are the microRNA overexpressing lines, and these happen to be the wild type Pusa basmati plants. And this is how the plant would look like when they are grown. So this is the wild type, and this robust phenotype with greater number of panicles and hence the number of eels are the microRNA overexpressing lines that we have here. This particular microRNA makes the plant more vigorous, robust. Of course, the height is an issue here, but then this plant is producing more seeds when grown under normal environmental conditions. So like I said, a lot of this work is unpublished, so I'm not getting into details of that, but hopefully we will have a publication on this soon. And with this I'll wind up. So this is the place where our lab is situated, an aerial view, and my team, without whom I would not be in a position to present this work here. And of course I cannot end without thanking the funding agencies because they are responsible for the finances in the or for the research project. So with this, I'll close and thank you to all for a very patient listening. And if there is any questions, I would be happy to take them.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Indeed, it was a wonderful talk. So
Thank
the
you.
session is open for questions. So, any questions?
Hello.
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, ma'am. This is Himani Pan. I have
Yes,
a question.
Himani.
Ma'am, did you also look into the epigenetic modulators? For example, the families of chromatin modulators expressed during the soil stress? And is there any relationship between the miRNAs and the transcription factors? That's all.
Himani, I hope you were not reading my mind. Well, yes, we have looked at epigenetic regulations, but I have not included that as a part of my talk here. And in fact, this particular microRNA that I presented here also acts at the epigenetic level. It is a transcription, it is acting both at the transcriptional level as well as the post-transcriptional level. And at the TGS level, it is regulating a DNA methyl transferase. And now you can understand that once methyl transferase is getting regulated, the entire chromatin modeling would get affected. And yes, we are looking into it, but this is still data which is being worked at in the lab. So it's very difficult to talk about it now.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you. Ma'am, can I ask you one more question?
Yes, please.
Ma'am, did you look at the stresses one at a time, or or in some plants you look at as a combination of multiple stresses?
Okay, so when we started, Himani, we took one stress and one plant at a time because you cannot have too many variables together. As the picture started emerging, we started first combining plants under a constant stress, and then we started combining stresses on the same plant. So what I have walked you is a journey work for the last 20 years or so. But yes, it was progressed in a specific manner. We have now reached a position where we are doing two stresses or maybe three stresses at a time. But when we started, it was with one stress.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah.
The other question? I have two questions, ma'am.
Yeah, Dr. Rao
One is
probably has
that,
a question.
you
He's
know,
raising his hand.
Please, sir, go ahead. Sir, please unmute. Rao, sir, please unmute your mic.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
please.
we can hear you.
Now, my question is a general one. Since you had included climate change in your title, I was just wondering, global warming is trend that's seen everywhere, which is due to increasing carbon dioxide concentrations. Generally, it is believed that carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere could be limiting for photosynthesis, right? So,
Right.
is there any experimental evidence that global warming or increased carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere might lead to increased productivity of cereals?
Um, a very interesting question. This is definitely not an area that we are working on, but just for curiosity, I keep reading lots of literature, and I'm sure you must be better read as compared to what I have read. There are groups who are working on this. In fact, I think in ERI, a lot of work is being done, C3, C4, converting C3 plants to C4 plants, and all of that kind of research is happening. And they are trying to understand this effect of, or rather identify those rubiscos which can produce more efficient photosynthesis under high carbon dioxide conditions. But this is not a work which is being done in my lab. This would only be the literature knowledge that which I have read, and probably I am not well versed in it.
No, some time ago there was at POSA Institute, they were doing some kind of experiments like this under greenhouse conditions
Yes.
by exposing these plants to different carbon dioxide concentrations. My question is, do you feel that this increase in productivity, probable productivity due to increased carbon dioxide concentrations is simply compensated by other stresses, and finally you don't see a big change at all? In other words, the plus achieved through increased carbon dioxide concentration is being lost due to some other stresses. So you don't see any effect.
Okay, I will not carbon dioxide per se, because this is something that we have not mentioned, so I would not comment on it. But yes, there is compensation in photosynthesis cross stresses. Cross stresses, when I say what we have found from our studies is, since we had identified few microRNAs which are affecting the photosynthetic machinery, and we are that still study is still in its initial stages. But what we have found is, when there is priming, or there is a short exposure to heat stress, it results in an enhancement in the photosynthesis. We within my lab, we don't understand the molecular mechanisms behind it. We have also found that virus infection or infection by any other biotic stresses also has an indirect effect on the photosynthetic machinery, where it increases for a short duration. But then the overall in the overall plant, there may be susceptibility, so it doesn't really perceive down to that level. But yes, there is an effect. How and why is something which we don't understand, and we are still trying to look at it. And that was what led me to start reading about this, probably to find a lead to understand. And if you understand, you please let me know also.
No. Would you speculate that stresses like CO2 or light stresses would also have some direct relevance to microRNA?
Light stress definitely has. Light has a definite influence, and from whatever we have identified so far, it is more of the light signals turn out to be more inhibitory as far as the photosynthesis is concerned. But carbon dioxide, I don't want to comment, because this is something that we have not touched, and I don't want, and whatever would be my personal view, and I really don't want to comment on this on a public forum.
Did you do any such experiments on non-economically important plants?
No, we haven't, because the major limitation as far as microRNA work is concerned is the presence of sequence information. We cannot touch microRNAs till we have sequences about the targets, about the loci from where they are being produced. And we would definitely like to look at these in some of the medicinal plants or the others. But our limitation is absence of sequence information, and it's too much getting into sequencing and all of that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay, ma'am. So there is a question one in chat box. So this Harish is asking about there is the effect of the temperature raise 3% temperature effect on the plant growth. So
Oh,
it's due
yes.
to the physiological
Yes.
and molecular mechanisms.
Thank you, Harish. Yes, I probably skipped to dwell this point while I was talking. So what happens is, when we were doing these experiments on heat stress, we found that there were these common microRNA nodes, and these common microRNA nodes are the ones which also get tweaked in response to salt stress. Now, I'm using the word tweaked rather than regulated, because the degree and the type of regulation under varying salt stress or varying heat stress may be actually different. And what we when we did these experiments in absence and in presence of light, we found that they were totally different responses. Absence of light was actually giving a better tolerance in terms of, looked like giving a better tolerance in terms of the microRNA profiles as compared to light. And this is what I just said, that light seemed to be inhibitory. But this is what we have observed in the expression profiles of the microRNA and the targets. We cannot correlate it at this moment directly with the physiology of the plant, but it is likely, it can be hypothesized that the absence of light would have a more a stronger effect on the physiology of the plant. And this is probably the reason that why yield losses are more when the light is not there, as compared to a situation, a morning time or a daytime situation where light is there. So probably when we just look, when we are trying to look at stresses, we also have to understand in background what light is doing. Because see, right from germination, it is the light which is regulating. This is what we have studied as classical botany, that light is regulating the development of the plant, PR, PFR, all the classical studies. But here, when we start looking at stresses, we totally forget about that. And therefore we are now doing experiments plus and minus light to understand what is happening, what kind of changes are occurring at the molecular level. We definitely find changes happening there, but we need to really comprehend what is happening at the translational or at the protein level, and how it is affecting the physiology of the plant. But definitely absence of light will have a stronger effect on the physiology of the plant, and that is why we see a 3% variation in yield. And if we can study more in this line, probably we can try to bridge the gap and work towards the yields. Hopefully I can answer your question, Harish. I am sorry I didn't, I skipped it when I was passing this slide. Yeah. Is there any other question? Hello?
Ma'am, you got some more questions in the chat box.
Chat box? I have to go to the chat box?
There is one more question.
No, you can just answer.
No, I'm reading it.
Okay, so between
Hello.
Harish, what kind of light and dark cycles you follow for growing your experimental plants? Harish, that is discussing experiments in details. I think We can do that on a one-on-one sometimes whenever we have an opportunity, because different experiments are planned in a different way. It will not be possible for me to explain here, but yes, we do continuous light, we do continuous dark, we break the light and dark cycles. We also using individual kinds of lights, red light alone, red far red, all those kinds of experiments. But that requires a detailed personal discussion, not on this forum. Then there is another question by Deepti May, which talks about, have you done any experiments on abiotic stresses like macro and micronutrients? No, we haven't included that. But yes, nutrients do have a effect, because most of these microRNAs which are getting affected, say in response to salt or drought, are affecting the nutrient transporters in the cells, whether it is sodium or whether it is potassium, zinc, sulfur, phosphate. All these are getting affected. But this is one field that we are not looking at. Okay, another question by Prachiti. Why would there be a sudden abundance in microRNAs naturally for developing abnormalities? This can happen due to a variety of reasons in response to pathogen attack, whether they are viruses, they could be bacteria, fungi. Then there are aberrations which occur in response to stress, and some of these are not stresses might upregulate or downregulate some of the useful microRNAs, and this would affect the physiology of the plant, leading to leaf curling or puckering or drooping, so on and so forth. Okay. I hope I'm being able to answer the questions. There's another one which talks about climate change, that I think I've already discussed. Because climate change happens to be a very broad term, and that was more for introducing the slide, and may require a one-on-one discussion, because a lot of the data here, I don't want to talk about it, would be unpublished. And the talk is getting recorded. Yes.
Okay, ma'am, I have one question, actually two questions. So the question one is that how this RNAi and the stress combinations, how lethal this is for plant? I mean, is there any phenotypic data available?
Oh
How
yes,
this affect the plant?
this can be pretty lethal. If you can knock out some of these essential microRNAs, since you have said RNAi, I'll talk on a generic term. See, RNAi would involve processing of double-stranded molecules into small RNAs, and then the functionality of these RNAs. The processing molecules will be dicer and the related molecules, and the functionality molecules would involve AGO and the related molecules. Now, without getting into the details, if you can just knock out one of the dicer or AGO, you would get drastically different phenotype, and there are times when plants may not even get produced, or they would just turn it to there are microRNAs which, when overexpressed, would turn a rice plant into something which is a grass-like structure, and it would just die off within the culture tube conditions only. So the defects can be pretty drastic. But what we have to understand is how plants are able to perceive and to resist these stresses, resist the deregulations of the microRNAs, because microRNAs themselves, the production is controlled by most of the classical transcription factors, the ARFs and the GMIBs and the GAMIBs and so on and so forth. So each plant would have its own capacity to resist this regulations. Those which can resist for a longer time categorized towards the tolerant species, and and those which cannot, and they die off, get categorized or clubbed within the susceptible species. These are the broad classifications as we understand. Okay, but how individual plant is regulating it in its particular niche is something that we have to still understand. It's still a big long way to go before we can understand. This is like a mesh of when I'm teaching in a class, how I like to explain is, if you have seen a puppet dancer from backstage, there would be a series of string on the person's fingers, and by regulating the strings, they would regulate how the puppets would behave. Now you just here, in this case, the puppets would be the microRNAs, and the strings are the various signaling networks operating in the cell. And I don't know whose fingers these are. We still have to understand how they are, who is regulating them, and how they are regulating. This is how I teach classically in class, if I am able to answer your question.
Thank you, ma'am, with a nice example. So one more question is that how does RNAi affect the protein biosynthesis, like the protein level, whether there's some phosphorylation and post-translational modifications due to this RNAi inhibitory natures. So
okay, so in simple terms, RNAi will go and eat the RNAi molecules, the siRNAs and the microRNAs will go and will cleave the transcript. Now, once the transcript gets cleaved, it is not available for the ribosome machinery to form the protein, and hence that particular protein is not produced. There are instances where instead of cleaving, they can put the transcripts for block the transcripts from getting translated. Now this is called translation repression. So either the ribosomes will not will fall off, or the will get blocked in a manner. There would be steric hindrance in a manner that the translation process cannot move forward, so the protein cannot be formed. This is the classical manner. Other than that, there are molecules which will influence the formation or the of important proteins in the transcription machinery, like the EIFs, the ribosomes, ribosomal proteins per se. And once these proteins are not available, then you understand that the normal process will not happen. As far as now, coming to answer your question on post translational modifications of the proteins, then the proteins which are involved in the biogenesis of these small RNAs, of the siRNAs or the microRNAs, like the disers, the HILs, the AGOs, they are controlled by phosphorylation, dephosphorylation events. There are a lot of splicing events also which are occurring at different. So a lot of proteins are involved at different levels, and post-transcriptional modifications of these proteins are definitely playing a role in this. So there are multiple steps by which RNAi will influence the cellular machinery under a given condition.
So is there any data which showing the phosphorylation or dephosphorylation of protein in response to RNAi?
Not direct
protein,
data.
Some MAP
There
kinases
is not there is no direct data, but there is data which shows that microRNAs are regulating the levels of various kinases, including some of the MAP kinases. And if the activity of the MAP kinases or the levels of the MAP kinases get influenced, we expect that there would be downstream changes. There is no direct data, but this is indirect evidence. Since the level of the kinase or the phosphatase is getting affected, it is very obvious that the downstream processes are also getting affected.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other question? So I would request to Gokul, please end the session officially.
I think 2 more questions in the chat box, ma'am.
Okay.
Can you just see that, or
Okay.
should I read?
I think, okay, this is, does polypolarity phenomena has a role in managing plant stress? Very nice question. Yes, polypolarity does play a role. To answer it very simply, microRNAs or even some of the siRNAs like the RASIs or the NAT siRNAs, they are endogenous. They come from endogenous genes. So as the ploidy changes, the copy number of the microRNA genes or the siRNA genes are also changing, and thus ploidy will have does have a direct effect. uh, Traditionally, we are looking at diploid organisms or diploid plants when we are trying to study this. But there is a group in Delhi University who is by Dr. Sandeep Das. They are looking at the polyploidy phenomena. They are trying to understand how the ploidy levels influence the microRNA or the siRNA levels, and there seems to be a regulation. Not all the alleles, not all the loci will be expressing. How this would vary under stress, probably he would be the correct person to answer that question. But you can read some of the papers published by the groups, and they have shown that ploidy will influence the number of loci that are getting influenced, and these some of these include the stress regulated microRNAs. This is what I would like to tell you now, because this is a huge topic in among itself. I hope I can answer that question. You can go, and there are some very interesting papers which talk about how about the ploidy levels, about the evolution in terms along evolutionary divergence in terms of ploidy, and about even some of the syntenic behaviors there. So a lot of interesting papers on this topic which can be read. And now I move on to the next question, and it talks about lot of study on the intertalk between abiotic and biotic stress, especially some abiotic stress has antagonistic effect on some microbes. So there are any information regarding miRNA signaling can be triggered by abiotic stress against biotic stress. In fact, it is the other way around, that some of the biotic stresses trigger microRNA signals that provide, that enhance or reduce the tolerance to abiotic stresses. This is especially, a lot of studies have been done to understand the crosstalk between virus infection with respect to drought stress. Another aspect of microbe is where people have looked at understanding the microRNA signatures which change in response to nodule formation in roots, specifically in legumes. So that is another area which has been studied. A lot of interesting papers are available, and you can go back and read some of them. But yes, in a one-word answer to your question is yes. So any other question?
I think that's the last question, maybe.
So
Yes.
Gokul, please,
Yes. Actually, ma'am,
please
yeah,
go
yeah.
ahead.
It's we are delighted to have you. It was such a wonderful, insightful session. Thank you, every participants. Thank you, ma'am, for joining in with us. We hope all this pandemic ends soon, and you come and visit us in Berhampur soon. With that, we conclude the sessions again. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Sujan.
Thank you to all.
Wonderful to have you.
And I hope to see some of you in ICGB for your PhD, especially the student population and the postdocships. And hope we can, not only in my lab, ICGB is a big place, and hopefully we can interact sometime. Thank you all for listening. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you
See you in next webinar session. Thank you, Sujan. Thank you, everyone.